Well, after about 5 or so years of waiting, Darkglass has finally released the X900. So if I'm not mistaken, this is the 4th Darkglass product to feature the X preamp. Now, it might be the 5th if you count the Microtubes Infinity. I don't, because it didn't quite sound like that. But this often misunderstood circuit has been my favorite since I finally learned how to dial in the X Ultra to suit my needs, my play style, and what my ear wanted to hear. And I'm pleased to announce that just about all of the features that I love about the X Ultra and more are found in this head. So here at the Bass Channel, we've done, I think, 2 separate videos touching on the X7, the original X circuit pedal, and the X Ultra. And in both of those, we did our best to officially describe the function of this amp and how it works and what it sounds like and how to get the best sounds out of it. I'm going to leave all the formalities and the official language to those videos if you want to go watch them. They sound pretty much identical to this. But the thing that I like about this amp over the pedal is that your high pass and low pass knobs are big knobs, so they're a lot easier to see where you're setting those parameters. And I don't know about you, but for me, when those knobs are bigger and I can grab onto them and, I'm like a toddler, it just makes it easier to understand for me and visualize what's happening. So I'm gonna try my best to informally explain this amp in case you don't know how it works. If you do, skip ahead. If you don't, think of it as essentially splitting your signal into 2 parts. The bottom half, the lower frequency, the deep rumble part, passes through a compressor, whereas the top half, the treble half, the bright half passes through a distortion circuit. That part is easy enough to understand. So keeping with that, the LPF stands for low pass filter, and that determines at which frequency is the signal going to cut off and go into the compressor. So if you set it at its maximum setting, that's set to 500 Hertz. That means everything at 500 Hertz and below is going through that compressor. At its counterclockwise or minimum setting, it's at 50 Hertz, meaning that everything 50 Hertz and below is gonna go through that compressor. Now, a lot of those frequencies you probably aren't gonna hear, but that's how it works. So obviously the magic comes somewhere in the middle. Now for me, for how I play, for what I want to hear, I found that right about the 10 or 11 o'clock position on the LPF was best for me. The way that I dial it in is I start at about halfway or so, and I just kind of move it back and forth until it sounds the biggest and the boomiest. And both here and on the pedal, the Ultra version, that's right about the 10 or 11 o'clock position. Now the HPF, or the high pass filter, does the same thing, except this time it's determining what the cutoff frequency of your high side goes through the distortion. So its minimum setting, or fully counterclockwise, is 100 Hertz, meaning that everything from 100 Hertz and above goes through the distortion. That is really hard to say, goes through the distortion. And the best way to describe that type of sound on the lower end of the spectrum of the HPF knob is that it's more fuzzy, it's a lot bigger, it's woollier, it's all those kind of synonyms that you associate with fuzz, because it's distorting a lot of the mids and low mids. as you start to turn it up or clockwise, the maximum setting is 1 kilohertz or 1000 hertz, which means that everything at 1000 hertz and above goes through the distortion. And essentially what that's doing is it's leaving a lot of your mids untouched, depending on where you set the LPF. If you leave it like I do at around 10 or 11 o'clock, that means that a lot of your mids, they're not getting processed one way or the other. They're not getting compressed and they're not getting distorted. So it gives you a very rich hi-fi kind of sound to where your subby lows, but not ultra subby, but your boomy lows get compressed and jump out and stand out. And the highest kind of string sizzle, some of that little bit of fret buzz, fret clank, you know, that type of sound is what's getting distorted, meaning that the frequencies between about 300 hertz and 800, 900 hertz are unprocessed. For me, the HPF knob is probably the one that I'm tweaking the most. And again, it just depends on what bass I'm playing, what song it is, what vibe I want to go for, etc., etc. And that will dictate where the HPF knob goes for me. As you may or may not remember, I recorded the entire Lunar Satan album back in 2019, 2020 with the X Ultra preamp. Every single song, even the one that's the clean ballad, features this circuit. Depending on the song, I found for me, the sweet spot for the HPF is anywhere from probably 1 o'clock to 3 o'clock. And again, it just depended on how clanky I wanted it, or if I wanted a little bit more saturation in some of those, you know, lower upper frequencies, if that makes sense. 500, 600, 800, those frequencies right there. If I wanted more saturation there, I would crank it down. But if I wanted it to just be really ultra defined and sharp and hi-fi, then I'd turn it up a little bit. And finally, the one small difference from the pedal is the mix knob. Now, it essentially does the same thing, whereas the X Ultra has the low level and high level. This is just a mix. Now, here's the thing that I found peculiar. Most of the time when I would use the pedal, again, depending on the song, the low level and high level were always about the same, and I'd kind of keep them at 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock. So it was loud, it was pushing some volume. But when I set the mix knob halfway, 50%, you'd think you'd get an even amount, and maybe you do. It doesn't sound the same as the low and high level being at approximately equal values at 3 o'clock. So you'll see that a lot of the settings in this video I kind of dialed into mostly what I wanted to hear while also showing versatility. But the mix knob, in my opinion, sounded best kind of where it is, which is anywhere between 9 o'clock and 11 o'clock. Like under the 12 o'clock position, you get more of the low than the high, because when that high jumps out at you, it can get a little ear fatiguing, so you can mellow it out while it's still maintaining its presence and definition without it being fatiguing. But if you're familiar with the other Darkglass amps, the Microtubes 900 and the Alpha Omega 900, it features a lot of the other same things that you've come to know and love and expect from those amps. It's got the active passive, it's got your graphic EQ, level knob, your switch to engage the distortion, and all of the same cool back panel features, which is 2 speaker outputs, a pre-EQ DI, a post-EQ DI, cab sim, headphone, the whole 9. It's all back here just like you'd expect on the other 2 amps. But the one other cool feature that this carries over that I want to talk about from the pedal, I don't know if the X7 did it, but the X Ultra definitely did. It was kind of a secret setting to where, you know, when you turn that pedal on, the lights would turn on red, and when you kicked the distortion off, the distortion was off. But if you wanted to disengage the distortion but leave the compressor, it was called the blue setting. So I forget how you did it, but I think you went into the software, changed one parameter, and the pedal lit up blue, and that's how you knew that regardless of if you had the distortion on or off, that compressor, the low-end compressor, was always going to be there. And once I found that setting, that's how I set it. Like, my pedal lights up blue all the time. So this carries that feature over, but you don't have to plug it in. It's not really a secret setting. It's just this button right there for clean compression. And then you can just dial in the level of that compressor. So if your X distortion circuit is off, you can still run your low end through the compressor. So I think I'm just going to leave it there. I mean, there's a lot to say about this circuit, whether it's the amp or the Ultra pedal or the small one or the regular original X7. There's just so much you can do with it. I've been using it, again, I had the Ultra version. I've been using it a lot from when it came out in, I think, 2018 or 19 was the Ultra, up to now. Like, that's my favorite Darkglass circuit. I've never really gotten along with the Alpha Omega. I like the B7K a lot, but I just think that the X is the best one for me, for my ear. You might like the Alpha, you might like the Vintage, I don't know. But either way, I thought it would be fun to include a short little montage of some of my favorite tones that I've gotten with the X circuit. Now, the majority of these are with the pedal because they were all between 2019 and 2022, I think. So the amp didn't exist yet, but all of the tones in the pedal you can get with the amp. But here is just a short collection of some of my favorite tones that I've been able to achieve with the X circuit. If you do want more of a formal, explanatory literature in the way that Darkglass intended you to hear it, you can check out our X Ultra or X7 video right up here. But hopefully this explanation cleared things up if you were a little confused on how this circuit worked. So thank you very much for watching. Like, dislike, all the YouTube stuff, and until next time, be safe, and I'll see you later.